So welcome back to Blender 3.3. Today we're going to talk about some useful settings for modeling. The first thing I want you to look at is your preferences. You find that in the Edit menu. And when you go under System, you find here under Memory and Limits the number of undo steps. Try to have that at least at 100, preferably higher. This will depend on how much memory your machine has. So I have it at 200, and a large number is very advantageous. This will allow you to very flexibly undo your steps while modeling, and these numbers grow rather quickly when you work on an object, and it's very helpful to have that fairly high, so you're never running out. The second thing is that under here render devices, make sure your graphics card is being used. So I have an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2060. Make sure it's ticked so it's being used when there is some rendering going on. Otherwise it will take very long. Okay, let's close that. Here we have a standard scene. I have my standard cube, and sometimes you're working on a scene and you want to make an object that is kind of very close to real world measurements. When you do that, it helps, and let me just go into edge mode here. I'm in edit mode. As you can see here, I'm in edge mode. I had a separate video about the differences between object and edit mode that you can look at. I'm going to link that up in the comments, in the description. So when you go into edge mode, sometimes you'd like to know how long this is. And yes, of course, you can move things around and you can change it. You can look at it and say, oh, this is about right. But sometimes you want to work to measure. So when you go into your viewport overlays, this is the place where you define everything. For example, if you want to see the axis, you can turn them off, or you can turn on even the z-axis. So this is where all of this stuff is being defined. But here you can also, under measurement, set the edge length. And then when we look at our cube, we can see this cube is 2 meters long. This edge here is 2 meters long. And while I'm selecting or even multi-selecting, I'm now getting information about the length of these 3 edges. Or when in face mode, I get automatically information about how long each of the 4 edges of this face is, and so on, based on what I select or multi-select. That's very useful. So for example, if I go in here and I'm going to grab this and I'm going to shift this around, you can see that I'm getting constant information about the length of my edges involved. And while I'm modeling, I can now kind of do that in a very informed and very precise way. This is very useful. It is very useful until you work on very small geometry. So this makes sense, but when it gets very small, you can see it can get very crowded. For example, let's undo that, and I would be selecting this. Let's say I do some edge loops, and I create lots of edge loops, and then you can see that it only works up to a certain level of detail, and then it can get very crowded. So you're more likely to, you will probably need to turn this on and off based on what you're doing. Let's undo that. There is another thing I'd like you to know about. So if I go into object mode, and we had 2 cube, as all sides are 2 meters long. If I now go into object mode by pressing tab, and I would scale that, I make that a lot larger. And then I go into edit mode again, I still see these sides, these edges are 2 meters long, but that's not true. I just scaled it. How is that possible? Well, you have to apply those changes. So you have to press Ctrl A for apply. And in this case, we scaled. So I apply the scaling. and have a look at those features here. This is the information, the object properties, or the property information. You can see here we scaled by 2.136 in all three axes, but we haven't applied those. So when I press Ctrl A and I apply the scale and have a look at these numbers at the right side, they turn to 1 again. That means I have applied them, and now the cube has the standard size again, but now being larger. That means when I go back to edit mode, I get the true number. Now we can see an edge is 4.27 long in all three dimensions based on my selection here again. And that is very useful, but you have to keep in mind that when you do any transformations in object mode, you have to first apply them, otherwise they're not being reflected accurately in edit mode. Okay, so a last thing, and let me just, I can actually keep that for this last part. When I go into my overlay information again, one useful feature that that always helps me when I design objects that I'd like to use for, let's say, virtual reality applications is statistics. Because when you're modeling, you would like to know about the complexity of the things you're modeling, and to keep that in mind. So when I have my statistics on, I can get information about the number of objects that I have. I have 3 objects, a camera, a cube, and a light. And I have currently 1 object selected. Well, I'm in edit mode of 1 object, so this means I have 1 out of 3 being selected. If I would select all 3 of them, then I'm currently in edit mode, so I'm selecting all 3 of those. Then it shows me objects 3 of 3 right here. So let's go back to the cube. I have 1 object selected out of a total of 3. There are 8 vertices. I'm in object mode, so they're all being on. If I would just go into vertex mode in my edit mode, and I select 1, and I hold shift and I select another 1, then I see here I have 2 vertices selected out of a total of 8. I have 8 vertices on my cube. And if I would do a select with my select tool here, I can see I have 7 out of 8. Well, I missed one, and I missed this one down here that I now manually select. Now I have 8 out of 8. I have all the 12 edges. They're all selected, so 12 out of 12. And I have 6 faces. If I go into face mode and I select one of them, then I can see 1 face selected out of a total of 6. And then I also have information about triangles. So each face has 2 triangles that we don't see right now, but they're there. And I have 12 of them. So when you make decisions, when you model along, you will always have information about how big your model becomes, how complex the geometry is. And this will help you in case you want to keep these numbers low, especially when you work in mobile VR, or if you want to deploy something on a less performant computer. When you make games that are supposedly like that need to run on a low performance machine, you want to keep those numbers low. And by turning on the statistics, you can keep track of that, and that is very useful. Okay, that's all for today, and I see you next time.